I'll never forget that day. You're a valuable employee, but the company needs to move in a new direction. Their words were polite, their smiles fake. And then came the real blow. We'd like you to resign, voluntarily. It's best for everyone's reputation. They framed it as a mutual decision. But we both knew the truth. It wasn't my failure. It was theirs. Their mistakes, their bad leadership, and I was the scapegoat. I remember signing the resignation papers, my chin held high. No tears. No begging. Just one clear thought running through my mind. You will regret pushing me out. My name is Lauren. I'm 34, and for most of my career, I believed in hard work and loyalty. But what happened taught me the hardest truth: loyalty doesn't always pay off. The first few weeks after I left were the hardest. I still woke up early, my body on autopilot, but with nowhere to go. The weight of unfairness sat heavy on my chest, and for a while, I felt lost. But the more I sat with that anger, the clearer things became. If I let this define me, if I stayed stuck in that betrayal, it would break me. And that was not going to happen. So I started moving. I rebuilt my resume from scratch. I polished my online profiles. I enrolled in courses I'd put off for years. And most importantly, I made a promise to myself: never again would I let anyone else control my future. This wasn't just a comeback. It was the start of a new me. I threw myself into building something new. At first, it was small, freelance gigs, side projects, one-off consultations. Nothing glamorous, but every little win mattered. I said yes to everything that aligned with my skills, and even a few things that scared me. Slowly but surely, momentum started to build. People I'd worked with before began referring me to their networks. Clients left glowing reviews. My inbox started to fill, not with rejection letters, but with real opportunities. I sharpened my focus. I wasn't just chasing jobs anymore, I was crafting my personal brand. I rebuilt my website, created case studies from successful projects, and started sharing my insights on LinkedIn. And then, the breakthrough. An email landed in my inbox from a company I'd admired for years, a company that had always felt just out of reach. They needed help with a major transformation project and had heard my name through the grapevine. "We're impressed by your profile," the email read. "Would you be open to discussing a consulting role?" I stared at the screen, heart pounding. This was it. Proof that I was no longer just recovering, I was rising. We set up a meeting, and for the first time in a long while, I walked into a boardroom with complete confidence. I pitched my strategy, answered every tough question, and when I left, I knew I'd nailed it. A week later, I signed the contract. It was my biggest project yet, both in scope and in pay. I sat in my apartment that night, staring at the signed agreement, a glass of wine in hand. The same company that had pushed me out had faded into the background of my life. They didn't matter anymore. I was building something of my own now. And it felt damn good. I threw myself into building something new. At first, it was small, freelance gigs, side projects, one-off consultations. Nothing glamorous, but every little win mattered. I said yes to everything that aligned with my skills, and even a few things that scared me. Slowly but surely, momentum started to build. People I'd worked with before began referring me to their networks. Clients left glowing reviews. My inbox started to fill, not with rejection letters, but with real opportunities. I sharpened my focus. I wasn't just chasing jobs anymore, I was crafting my personal brand. I rebuilt my website, created case studies from successful projects, and started sharing my insights on LinkedIn. And then, the breakthrough. An email landed in my inbox from a company I'd admired for years, a company that had always felt just out of reach. They needed help with a major transformation project and had heard my name through the grapevine. "We're impressed by your profile," the email read. "Would you be open to discussing a consulting role?" I stared at the screen, heart pounding. This was it. Proof that I was no longer just recovering, I was rising. We set up a meeting, and for the first time in a long while, I walked into a boardroom with complete confidence. I pitched my strategy, answered every tough question, and when I left, I knew I'd nailed it. A week later, I signed the contract. It was my biggest project yet, both in scope and in pay. But the real challenge started after the ink dried. The company's internal structure was a mess, fractured teams, outdated processes, and low morale. I spent my first 2 weeks interviewing staff, mapping out workflows, and identifying the deepest cracks. It was exhausting, but every insight fueled my plan. I drafted a bold strategy and presented it to the leadership team. This isn't just a quick fix, I told them. It's a complete reset. And if we commit, we'll see results. To my surprise, they backed me 100%. I hired a small team of specialists, set new benchmarks, and kicked off the transformation. Nights were long. Challenges popped up daily. But every time I hit a roadblock, I remembered that moment when I'd been pushed out, and it made me push harder. One Friday evening, as I wrapped up a late strategy session, the CEO stopped by my office. "I don't say this often," she said, "but you've been a game changer for us." I smiled, packing up my things. "I'm just getting started." At home that night, I poured a glass of wine and looked at the signed contract again. I thought back to that awful day when I'd been forced to resign, made to feel like I was expendable. But now? I was indispensable. And I was just getting warmed up. The project took off faster than anyone expected. Within a month, we were already seeing measurable improvements, deadlines met ahead of schedule, smoother communication between departments, and a noticeable boost in morale. Weekly strategy meetings became my new normal, and each session solidified my role as a trusted leader. I wasn't just consulting, I was shaping the company's future. One afternoon, while preparing a presentation for the executive board, I received an email that made me pause. The subject line: Consulting inquiry, urgent support needed. I clicked it open and froze. It was from a senior manager at my former company, the very place that had forced me out for the good of the brand. She detailed that they were launching a major new initiative and needed a strong consultant to help steer the project. She didn't mention me by name, of course. She probably didn't realize the inquiry had landed right in my inbox. I stared at the screen, heart pounding with a mix of disbelief and irony. Jenna called just then, and I could hardly contain my grin. "You're not going to believe this," I said, reading her the email. Her laugh echoed through the phone. "Oh, that's karma at its finest." I spent the next hour debating my move. Part of me wanted to delete the message and move on. Another part, stronger, knew this was a full-circle moment I couldn't ignore. So, I drafted a professional but pointed reply. "Thank you for your inquiry. I'd be happy to discuss your project in detail. Let me know when you're available to meet." No mention of our shared history. No hint of the irony. Just business. A few hours later, her reply came through. "Fantastic. We're looking forward to hearing your ideas. Are you available this week?" I sat back in my chair, processing it all. This wasn't just a win, it was validation on a level I hadn't even dreamed of when I left that office with my dignity barely intact. In the days that followed, I prepared meticulously. Not out of spite, but because I knew my worth, and I intended to deliver excellence, no matter what personal history lay beneath. That night, as I closed my laptop, Jenna texted me again. "How's it feel, full circle?" I smiled at my screen, typing back. "Like I've already won, before I even walk into the room." And deep down, I knew. This was no longer about proving them wrong. It was about proving to myself that I had become the leader I always was meant to be. The meeting was set for Thursday afternoon. I arrived early, stepping into the same corporate tower I had once walked out of, head held high, after they forced me to resign. The lobby looked the same, polished floors, glass walls, that faint smell of coffee and toner, but I felt completely different. This time I wasn't here as an employee. I was the expert. The receptionist led me to a familiar conference room. Sitting around the table were faces I recognized, some surprised to see me, others carefully neutral. And there, at the head of the table, was the manager who'd sent the inquiry. She looked up and blinked, realizing who I was. "Lauren," she said, clearing her throat. "I didn't realize." I smiled, calm and collected. "It's good to see you again." The meeting began, and I listened as they laid out their project challenges. Same old problems: poor communication, outdated systems, low morale. As I took notes, I couldn't help but feel a wave of déjà vu. These were the very issues I had tried to fix before they decided I wasn't the right fit. When they finished, I spoke. I outlined a clear, bold strategy: no sugarcoating, no playing small. I pointed out their gaps, offered solutions, and mapped out a timeline that would get them back on track. Every word was measured, every suggestion sharp. And I watched their faces. Gone was the polite indifference I remembered. Now? They were leaning in, taking notes, nodding along. They needed me. By the end of the meeting, the manager leaned forward, her tone softer. "We'd love to move forward with you. Can you send over your terms?" I met her gaze. "Of course. My rates and conditions are standard for high-impact consulting." She hesitated for a beat. "We understand." Walking out of that room, I felt a rush of emotions: pride, power, and a deep, quiet satisfaction. I wasn't here to settle old scores. I was here to win on my own terms. And I had just done exactly that. Signing the contract with my former company felt surreal, but I kept it all business. Within a week, I was deep into their systems, analyzing workflows and interviewing team members. It didn't take long to confirm what I already suspected: nothing had changed since I left. The same bottlenecks, the same lack of accountability. But this time I had full authority, and a clear mandate to fix it. I reorganized their project structure, redefined responsibilities, and set hard deadlines. Some people resisted at first: old habits die hard, but when results started to show, the mood shifted fast. Every week, I delivered progress reports to the leadership team. Each report showed measurable improvements: faster turnarounds, smoother communication, happier clients. My inbox filled with internal thank you notes from employees who finally felt heard. One afternoon, after a particularly successful strategy session, the senior manager who'd hired me pulled me aside. "Lauren," she said, her tone softer than before, "I just want to say, you've made an incredible difference here. We should have listened to you from the start." I smiled politely. "I'm glad the project is progressing well." Inside? I felt vindicated, but also strangely detached. This wasn't about personal satisfaction anymore. It was about the work, the results, and the fact that I was finally in control. As weeks passed, I saw real transformation. Cross-functional teams began collaborating like never before. New tools I'd introduced streamlined processes that had once seemed impossible to untangle. I set up leadership workshops, empowering mid-level managers to take ownership of their roles. By the end of the quarter, the turnaround was undeniable. Their team had hit every target, and the project was now a case study in recovery. One day, during a company-wide meeting, the CEO publicly acknowledged my work. "Lauren's leadership has been instrumental in bringing this project back to life," she said. The room applauded, and though I kept my expression calm, inside I felt a quiet, deep pride. That evening, Jenna texted me after seeing a news article about the company's success. "Saw the article, full circle moment?" I replied. "Full circle, and I'm the one drawing the lines now." Because now, it wasn't about proving my worth to them. It was about knowing it for myself. And I had. When the project wrapped up, I knew deep down that my time there had come to an end. They offered me a long-term consulting position, high pay, full flexibility, and the promise of continued influence. A year ago, I might have jumped at the offer. But now? I saw things differently. I thanked them for their trust and their recognition but politely declined. I'm proud of what we've built together, I told them, but it's time for me to take on new challenges. They looked surprised but respected my decision. In the weeks that followed, my reputation grew even stronger. News of the project's turnaround spread through the industry, and soon my inbox was overflowing with offers. Each new inquiry was proof that my skills, and my leadership, were now in high demand. I was selective, choosing only the projects that aligned with my values and vision. No more saying yes out of fear. No more working to prove myself to others. Jenna and I toasted my new chapter over dinner one night. "You're on fire," she said with a grin. "Remember when you thought your career was over?" I laughed, raising my glass. Sometimes the best beginnings come after what feels like the worst endings. Over the next few months, I expanded my reach, taking on global clients, launching a mentorship program for young women in business, and even being invited to speak at leadership summits. One day, scrolling through LinkedIn, I saw a post from my old company celebrating their latest milestone. I smiled, feeling nothing but peace. Because now, my worth wasn't tied to any company's success or failure. I had built something far stronger, belief in myself. And that was the real victory. My business continued to grow at a pace I hadn't dared dream of. I started working with international clients, running leadership workshops across different time zones, and expanding my mentorship program. Every week brought new challenges and new wins. But what touched me most was seeing the impact my work had on others. One of my ments landed her first executive role. Another negotiated a raise that doubled her salary. Their messages lit up my phone. "I couldn't have done it without you. You showed me what was possible." Every story reaffirmed why I had chosen this path. Then, one afternoon, I got a text from an old colleague. "Did you see? Greg resigned." Greg. My former boss, the one who had orchestrated my forced resignation. I stared at the message, feeling, what? I waited for satisfaction or vindication to wash over me, but instead, all I felt was calm. I typed back, "Wow. Hope the team's okay." And that was the truth. Because by then, I was so far beyond that chapter of my life that it barely felt real. That evening, Jenna and I met up for a quick drink. I told her about the news, and she raised an eyebrow. "So? Do you feel like you've won?" I smiled. "Honestly? I felt like I won the day I walked out and chose myself." She clinked her glass against mine. "To you. And to never letting anyone else define your worth again." We toasted, and as I looked around the bustling bar, I felt it deep in my bones. This was what real success looked like, not just professional wins, but inner peace. And the best part? I knew there was so much more ahead. Opportunities kept rolling in, and soon, I was invited to speak at international conferences. Standing on those stages, looking out at hundreds, sometimes thousands, of faces, I felt an energy I couldn't explain. I shared my story openly, how I'd been pushed out, how I'd rebuilt from scratch, and how that failure turned out to be my greatest gift. After my talks, people lined up to shake my hand. Some had tears in their eyes. "Your story gave me hope," one woman said. "I'd been scared to leave my toxic job, but now I know I can." That was the magic. It wasn't just about my success, it was about sparking something in others. Meanwhile, my podcast exploded in popularity. Each new episode brought in thousands of listeners, and soon, major media outlets started reaching out for interviews. I found myself featured in business magazines I'd grown up reading. But the true reward? Messages from everyday people who had been quietly struggling. "Because of you, I finally stood up for myself. I launched my own business, something I never thought I could do." Those messages fueled me more than any paycheck. One afternoon, after wrapping up a panel discussion, I sat backstage, reflecting. Just a few years ago, I'd been crushed, convinced my career was over. And now? I was shaping conversations on a global scale. Jenna texted me a photo of a billboard with my podcast ad on it. "Look who's famous now," she wrote. I laughed, replying, famous for being the woman who refused to quit. And honestly, that's exactly who I wanted to be. Because this journey had taught me something invaluable: success isn't measured by titles or salaries. It's measured by how many lives you touch, and how true you stay to yourself. Another year passed, and my business hit milestones I once thought were out of reach. I launched an online academy, offering courses for aspiring leaders. I partnered with major corporations to bring leadership development into their teams. I even signed a book deal, something that had been a dream buried deep for years. But the biggest shift wasn't external. It was inside me. I no longer felt the pressure to prove anything. The fear of losing my footing, of not being enough, had faded. In its place was a quiet confidence, a deep-rooted certainty that no title or contract could ever define my worth again. One afternoon, I was preparing a keynote speech for an upcoming global summit when I paused, looking around my office, my space, my creation. My phone buzzed with notifications, podcast downloads, client inquiries, messages from ments sharing their latest wins. And for the first time, I let myself really feel it: pride, joy, and a deep sense of fulfillment. Jenna called that evening. "I was just thinking about where you were a few years ago," she said. "Do you realize how far you've come?" I smiled, glancing at my vision board, the one I'd made the week after leaving my old job. "I do," I replied. "And the best part? I'm still growing." Because the truth is, success isn't a destination. It's a mindset. A commitment to keep choosing yourself, no matter what. And for me? That choice changed everything.